wildlife management stuff in Kenya and Tanzania almost 10 years ago now. And since then, she's gone on to do a bunch of things from misnetting rats and trying to understand like white nose disease or syndrome, whatever that is. And then she's gone on and done stuff with bears, I think, in northern states, and now she's doing lion conflict and interdisciplinary team work. So she's quite a variety. So today she'll be talking about one of her latest projects that she's working on.
Cool. Thanks, Blake. Yeah, so that's me. I'm Jackie. I'm a PhD student at Michigan State, and today I'll be talking about how we can improve human-lion conflict through interdisciplinary. So I'll start with just an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. I'll tell you a little bit about the lab where I work and my research. I'll explain human-lion conflict as it stands as a problem and the 5 main dimensions of this conflict. I will present a conceptual model that I created about these 5 dimensions. I will talk about some of the past research on human-lion conflict and the teams that were conducting that research. And then I'll switch and talk a little bit about the benefits of interdisciplinarity and how research teams can overcome some of the barriers to interdisciplinarity. So I work in a recap laboratory. That's the research on the ecology of carnivores and their prey. We have a really diverse lab, and we work on a huge assemblage of different research projects around the world, many of which are in East Africa. About half of my lab mates come from East African countries, including Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, and our work in these countries is all primarily focused on human carnivore conflict in some way, including illegal snaring of wildlife, spatial variation of carnivore occupancy, social dimensions of the conflict, all that. My field research is focused in the Tarangire-Manyara ecosystem of northern Tanzania, and I'm interested in the indirect ways that humans, their livestock, and lions all interact, and how the presence of one might impact the behavior of others. And in pastoral systems like this, livestock are kept in enclosures at night and then actively herded across the ecosystem during the day, an ecosystem that they share with wild carnivores. And while other carnivore species like hyenas and leopards usually attack carnivores or attack livestock while they're enclosed at night, lions in this region are really the only carnivore that's likely to attack during the day. So one of my main questions is that I try to answer with my research is, do cattle actually fear lions while they're grazing during the day? And is this expressed through anti-predator behaviors? So I followed cattle in the summer of 2007 along their typical daily grazing routes, which is about sunup to sundown, to record some of these behaviors, primarily vigilance, foraging, grouping behaviors, environmental factors about where they choose to graze, and things like that. I conducted this research in 4 villages across the region, 2 of which are at high risk of lion attack, and 2 that are at low risk of lion attack. And I'll just talk about briefly a couple of my results that are kind of interesting. Although I collected a lot of information in the field, only 3 variables were significant in explaining any of the cattle behavior. That was height of the vegetation around cattle, the time of day, and the level of risk. So on the plane here on the y-axis, we have the time that cattle spent vigilant in seconds, and on the x-axis, we have the height of the vegetation in centimeters. So we can see that cows at low risk spend significantly less time being vigilant as vegetation height increased. And that kind of makes sense because as they're surrounded by tall vegetation, there's less to look around at or to eat. However, we saw that cows at high risk of attack really did not alter their vigilance at all. So they really have their head down, they're foraging, no matter what the height of the vegetation is. And then throughout the time of day, again, we have time spent vigilant, and then the time of day on the x-axis. We can see that cattle at low risk spend significantly more time being vigilant in the later hours of the day. little more dangerous during those evening hours. Cattle are still out grazing as the sun is setting. Other carnivores are becoming more active on the landscape. But again, we see that the cattle that are at high risk really do not alter throughout the day at all, which is a little odd, but this could be explained by the risk allocation hypothesis, which kind of is if cattle are always at high risk, they might not necessarily be able to change their behavior because there's always that danger inherent in the places where they live. And then when it comes to the other main behavior of cattle, we have subgrouping. Both cattle at high risk and low risk form smaller groups as the day went on, or as the vegetation height increased. Sorry, the vegetation height on the x-axis. And again, that's probably likely because if the vegetation height is very tall, they can't really see each other, they can't stay up in groups. But then as time of day and risk has significant interaction in the model, we said cattle had low risk of attack really did not change their size of subgroups as the day went on. But cattle at high risk form significantly larger subgroups in those evening hours that might be more dangerous. So while there's a lot to discuss here in these results and some others, really the main takeaway is that the risk of depredation by lions is impacting cattle behavior, and that these cattle may be expressing different anti-predator behaviors based on the level of risk that they are experiencing. So my hope is that this information could help herders to better understand the indirect interactions between lions and their livestock, and it could help them to keep their animals safer. Another phase of my research looks at kind of the opposite relationship, and that's how humans and their large herds of livestock might be impacting the behavior of lions. So last year, I followed lions in and around Tanzania National Park, primarily one pride that lives exclusively within the protected area, and a second pride that kind of lives near the border and frequently ranges out into the village lands. And this gave me the unique opportunity to collect behavioral data that might be impacted by local people, as well as some tourist movements, tourist settlements, and things that are going on inside the park. But this is still ongoing, so maybe keep an eye out for some future results of that. So I hope that through all of this research, I will have some positive implications for solving some of these human-lion conflict issues, which we know is a really big problem in this region, and is starting to drive lions towards extinction. Human-lion conflict is known as a wicked problem, which means that it doesn't have one clear or obvious answer, and that there's a variety of stakeholders involved that all look at this problem from a variety of perspectives. So in order to better understand this problem, we need to try to understand the really complex system in which it exists. So in East Africa and around the world, human populations are growing. And this leads to competition over research or over resources, infrastructure development such as housings and road systems, and agricultural expansion to support the growing needs of human populations. In Tanzania, these changes are leading to a more stationary lifestyles, which are in stark contrast to some of the more traditional livelihood practices, such as pastoralism, where people don't really rely heavily on farming, but more so on livestock. And they move seasonally across the landscape, giving natural vegetation a chance to recover in their absence. But these more stationary lifestyles often nowadays have some negative impacts. For example, sometimes they lead to increased livestock disease because of more confined spaces for livestock or lack of veterinary services. They can also have some pretty serious cultural changes and that threaten the sustainability of those traditional ways of life. That could mean changes in family structures, employment options, or educational systems. It also includes disputes over land rights as land use changes. These disputes could also be stemmed from the creation of protected areas. Historically, many African people have been displaced because of the creation of protected areas. These protected areas have some of their own unique impacts as well, including increased tourism pressure and some new economic incentives or imbalances in some of the local communities that border these parks. And often these issues work in combination, which further complicates matters. For example, the creation of protected areas and other infrastructure development can lead to both physical and legal barriers between local people and wildlife. And in many direct and indirect ways, these issues interact in a diverse array to result in a diverse array of different and wildlife conflicts. So despite this complexity within the natural system and the many unique factors that are interacting to create these unique problems, they've often been very narrowly viewed within the scientific literature. In order to explain and kind of quantify this trend, Montgomery and his colleagues conducted a literature review of all the human-lion conflict studies since 1990, and they discovered that the conflict does not just have two dimensions like human and lion, as the name human-lion conflict kind of implies, but rather has five main dimensions: the human and the more general carnivore dimension, as well as the livestock dimension, wildlife dimension, and the environmental dimension. But no studies, 1990, investigated all five of those dimensions, and very few investigated more than two. And also, despite the fact that studies have been growing, the number of studies have been growing almost exponentially in this time, lion populations continue to decline steadily. So this suggested to me a fundamental problem in the way that researchers might be investigating human-lion conflict. And in order to shed some light on this issue and suggest ways that researchers might take a more integrative approach, I created a conceptual model to illustrate those five main dimensions and some of the factors that are involved in each one. I wanted to offer a clear vision or a visualization of this wicked problem that other scientists could maybe use when they were conceptualizing or planning research on their own wicked complex problems. So for that reason, I'm not going to talk about every single factor within the model, but I'd rather highlight the interactions between the factors and the importance of the different levels on which they interact. So, for example, we can take the carnivore dimension, in which is nested factors of the carnivore ecology, so spatial and temporal variation, behavioral choices made by individuals or groups of carnivores, things like that. And that dimension interacts with the human dimension on one level, where we see factors such as the way that people manage carnivore populations within and outside of the protected areas, the way that people perceive the risk of negative interactions with carnivores. It also interacts with the wild prey dimension, as carnivore movement often is a result of migration patterns by their prey or different prey species abundance across the landscape. But then these factors may also interact on another level. Take, for example, hunting. So the individual species or just the species or individuals that humans might target for subsistence hunting, trophy hunting, or even poaching will have impacts on the behaviors and the persistence of both carnivores and their wild prey. Another example might be the environmental dimension, which includes natural resources of the area, landforms of the region, weather patterns, climate, that sort of thing. So that impacts the wild prey dimension through the types of forage and the quality of forage across the landscape. So those behaviors, wild prey, and similar behaviors of livestock really have a direct impact on nutrient cycling across the system, which may impact future plant growth, things like that. And then, of course, water availability will impact decisions made and behaviors of factors in every single dimension. So each dimension can be populated by a great variety of different factors that exist generally in the region or are more specific to the ecosystem or village level that a team might be studying. But who really can study all of these things at one time? So luckily, teamwork is becoming more prevalent in science broadly. And international collaborations are predicted to continue to increase. PhD students today have shown a higher level of interdisciplinary background than previous generations. And so Montgomery and his colleagues also took a look at the teams that had been conducting those human-lion conflict studies in the past. And unfortunately, their results actually showed a lack of interdisciplinarity. These studies had an average of only 3 co-authors, and that did not increase since 1990. And oddly enough, the majority of studies assessed the human dimension of a conflict, but almost none of the studies included authors from social sciences or humanities-based disciplines. So most studies were looking at human dimensions of conflict, but did not include any scientists that were trained experts in studying human dimensions. And then also a separate study by Bauer and colleagues showed that teams studying lions not only lacked diversity in their disciplines, but also in their team members. So only 30% of lion researchers were women, and only 30% of lion researchers were African nationals. And then surprisingly, only 5% of lion researchers were Black. So team diversity has been shown to have positive impacts on team performance. And as diversity increases, so too does the frequency of team communication and more creative problem solving, as well as the implementation of higher quality decisions. But the foundation of a diverse interdisciplinary team does not include just those disciplines and race and gender, but it's the whole makeup of the team members themselves. So this could include personal histories, religious beliefs, different skill sets, education, all of that. So for example, research has shown that teams formed of people from diverse educational and professional backgrounds will perform better than those from homogeneous backgrounds due to their broader range of perspectives and knowledge from which to draw. They've also shown that teams with a mix of new and tenured individuals will be more innovative because of that mix of new ideas and established experience. So effective interdisciplinary teams studying human-lion conflict research in East Africa, for example, should include African natives, team members from around the world, seasoned experts, young professionals, graduate students, those with knowledge in ecology, biology, geology, anthropology, as well as communications, history, political science, and more. And while examples of these types of teams are becoming more prevalent with NGOs and governmental programs, in the world of academia, these are still comparatively very rare. So how this relates back to the human conflict on the ground, that is that lions are one of the most scientifically studied wildlife species. However, conflict with humans has been considered at levels, like severe levels, for at least a decade. In East Africa, lion numbers have increased by 60% in the last 15 years alone, and they now occupy just 8% of their historic range. And this isn't to downplay some of the great strides that certain teams have made in reducing conflict at a local level, but from a global perspective, from a species perspective, what we're doing is just fundamentally not working. So again, this made me think that there's some kind of major flaw in the way that researchers have been approaching this situation. So reducing conflict down to one or two aspects, or looking for quick fixes to the conflict, is really not the way to go. Livestock management has been the main recommendation on how to decrease human-lion conflict based on those studies, but very few of them actually mention specific strategies to take or tested the success of such strategies. So I think that researchers need to have a more nuanced understanding of each of the dimensions of conflict before recommending untested solutions. And I believe that interdisciplinarity is the best way for human conflict research to evolve and to improve. Certainly, these teams will experience some challenges along the way. The first might be that interdisciplinary teams might show some short-term reduction in productivity, given the extra time commitment and effort that it takes to involve so many people. But despite this initial increase in time, as confidence and trust is built in these interdisciplinary teams, it becomes quicker and can yield actually higher productivity. So studies have shown that interdisciplinarity actually increases long-term citation rates, which boosts the visibility of the work and reflects the influence. Team members should probably remember to just be patient during these collaborations and have a clear vision of their long-term goals. So conceptual models like the one I presented here, may help teams to better visualize their own wicked problems in a more structured and efficient way. Another challenge to interdisciplinarity is the variation in theoretical constructs, the judgments, and worldviews of the team members themselves. These might be directly linked to individual values. And in the context of wicked problems, this could mean that team members might have differing opinions on what aspects of the problem are most prevalent to society, or which are most relevant to the scientific evaluation of the problem. And it might also include a lack of familiarity with terminology and methods, concepts, and underlying assumptions from the various disciplines that are involved, and a difficulty in team members communicating these concepts. So I think that providing early career professionals and scientists with opportunities for cross-disciplinary scholarship will not only give people the tools needed to understand and incorporate these different philosophies into their work, but it could also result in new and innovative ways to approach these different problems. So I implore any faculty or administrators to diversify their course offerings and to encourage enrollment in non-science or non-major science courses or experiential learning opportunities for students. And as graduate students, we can also start preparing for interdisciplinary collaborations right now by seeking out these classes or independent studies in a variety of topics. So for example, I've just put up my own classes that I've taken in the last 3 years at Michigan State, and it includes not just classes in my home college of agriculture and natural resources, or a very closely related college, natural sciences, but also in social science and education. So I've taken population and community ecology, uncertainty and natural resource management, risk conservation and crime, stats for biologists, community-based international natural resource management, and qualitative field research methods. So my hope is that this will give me or will prepare me to not just ask questions about animal behavior and conservation, but to kind of question the very questions that biologists are asking in the field and to understand the systems where I work from a broader perspective. And finally, another challenge to interdisciplinarity might be cost. So there are several ways to be interdisciplinary, and that one is that each expert in their field collaborates with other experts during the entire research process. A second is where each team member attains a certain level of individual interdisciplinarity in their studies, like I've shown for myself. So this latter one might be more costly as it requires all team members to gain kind of a good deal of knowledge in each of those topics, while the former one a little more difficult to implement, and it may take more time and more communication between team members, so it might be more costly indirectly. So team leaders need to be aware of all of the challenges and the different alternatives as they're building and maintaining interdisciplinary teams. And also it might be more difficult for interdisciplinary teams to receive funding. So this will require some institutional level changes to fund and support these types of research. So those are just a few of kind of the many challenges that interdisciplinary diverse teams might face. But I don't believe that they are insurmountable, and I think that interdisciplinarity is really the best way for human lion conflict research to evolve and improve, as I've said. So my hope is that teams can begin transitioning out of their scientific silos and move towards a more integrative approach to science. And I hope that we can encourage new research norms, conservation norms, so that trying to approach and solve these wicked problems will not in itself be a wicked problem anymore. So here is a selection of some of my references, which I can share later if anyone is interested. And that's all, and I will take any questions.
I've got a quick question for your first couple of slides.
Yeah.
They were quite different to the rest of the talk.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a little overview of the research that I do and why, I don't know, I'm standing up here talking to you about behavioural conflict in Tanzania, but it's my work, so sure.
So with regards to your vigilance project, so I'm not that familiar with like lion and sort of the vigilance in cattle and this. I did a lot of work on shorebirds initially for my PhD. So we found that the closer you got to the predator concealing cover, the more time instead of vigilance. So they perceive, various forests, various long grass, and moving this. You just got completely opposite happen, right? But at least in the low risk habitat. Right?
Yeah, so I didn't want to spend too much time on the background of this particular research, but so I kind of collected a large variety of environmental variables. So here where I'm talking about vegetation height, that's the height of grasses and forests and things around the focal cow that I was observing at the time. And I also collected information about distance to any particular woody cover that could potentially hide on it. So that is 44 centimeters high and 30 centimeters wide, something like that. So that actually was not significant in the model whatsoever. So this vegetation height is really more like forage near and line of sight for the individual cows, not really coverage for predators. But I did collect that information and it just was not significant at all.
And how do you think how much exposure do these cows have to predators?
All day, every day. And so that's why this particular question was really interesting to me, is because in the literature on vigilance and livestock behavior, there's kind of two ways of thinking, is that, maybe we've bred out these anti-predator behaviors, or maybe we haven't, and they just aren't expressed properly. But no one's really been asking these questions in pastoralist systems. So they've been asking either like barnyard animals in a pasture where we stimulate a wolf outside of the fence, or a lot of research has been done in the American West and Canada, where they just kind of let cows off into the landscape and they graze for months all alone. But these cattle in East Africa and similar systems around the world, they are herded actively out onto the landscape every day with generally a young boy who takes them out looking for food, looking for water, and then at night they come back home. So every day these animals are out in the same bush area that wild carnivores are utilizing in. You know, wild prey, you're walking around, there's cows intermingling with your zebras sometimes, so yeah, all day, every day.
Do you know how successful those herders are at actually deterring attacks?
Yeah, so there's some results, or like there's a suggestion that lions can recognize certain people out in the landscape, like Maasai people that are wearing red, they have spears and things. But like I said, typically in practice nowadays, the herders are actually very young men. And having been out there with them day after day, they're kids. They're out playing. Sometimes they don't even watch the cows. They're talking to each other. Sometimes the cows get mixed up. So the attacks usually actually happen when a cow or a couple of cows get separated from the group. So I really wanted to keep my work focused on sort of like ecological variables and not necessarily herd behavior. But yeah, that does have sort of an impact. So they could. So some herds like pay adults to go out and watch, but generally adults are doing other work ways to bring in income for them. So. Yeah, so actually more individuals are lost to disease than any predators. So that is the problem, the lack of like vaccinations and veterinary services is a big problem for sure.
Any other questions? All right, good.
Thank you so much.
Hey, how's it going?